Welcome back to the Real Estate Girls podcast.
So, first, we'll kick things off with a quick market recap to keep you up to date on the latest trends in real estate. Then, we have a special guest with us today, someone who is a state certified residential real estate appraiser with deep expertise in the field. After our conversation with our guest, we'll answer one real estate question that many people don't commonly know, and then we'll wrap up things with an inspiring quote to keep you motivated through the week. So, Heather, what's going on in the real estate market?
Well, let's talk about the real estate market and the characteristics of home buyers. First-time home buyers decreased to 24% of the market share. That's 32% last year. So a decrease this year. This year now marks the lowest share since NAR began collecting the data in 1981. So National Association of Realtors started collecting all this data in 1981 about home buyers and the characteristics of home buyers. And first-time home buyers decreased to 24% of the market share this year.
That's 8% down.
Yeah,
right?
It is year over year.
So, yeah, that's interesting. We have been talking a lot about what's going on in the economy and the interest rates. And I just really feel in the panhandle of Florida, especially, people are struggling. And
Truly.
maybe they're just a little unsettled they don't know what the future holds. And so maybe they're just a little scared to buy. But I mean, I can't reiterate this enough. It is a great time to buy because it is a buyer's market, which means more than likely you're not going to have to pay full price for that property, and you can get seller to contribute to your closing cost or your down payment. So definitely, I think it's a great time to buy. Buyers don't have maybe the knowledge that they need.
That's right. I think you have more negotiating power right now since it is a buyer's market. There's so many resources out there. One thing is it's important to have a meeting with your realtor and discuss what type of resources are out there. We've had a lender on, Rhonda Jacquees, in our first episode, who talked about some of the resources that first-time home buyers have, including Casey, what are some of them that are here? The grants.
There's a first-time home buyer down payment assistance. It's up to $10,000.
Yeah.
It is a second mortgage, but I just had one close a couple weeks ago. It was a single mom with 3 kids. I loved her story, but it's not that she didn't have the money, but she just wanted that extra security net.
Absolutely.
Having 3 kids, she wanted to put in a fence. And this program allowed her to, coupled with, we did get some closing costs for her paid by the seller. She literally had to bring 0 to the closing table.
That's amazing.
So she got into this house, did not have to put any money down, didn't have to pay for a dime of closing costs with this program. And I was very happy for her. She's 28.
Oh, wow.
So she was 10 years younger than what the average age now is for first-time home buyers.
Yeah.
And being a single mom and having 3 kids, I just think it was such a huge accomplishment. And it was one of my favorite, honestly. Like, sometimes it's not always about how much the house is, it's about the stories.
Absolutely.
And I was really invested in this one.
Yeah,
So
I love seeing first-time home buyers accomplish their dreams, but also single women who are making it work out there in the economy. So let's talk about that stat. 62% of recent buyers I think this is the 2024 stat by NAR, were married couples, but 20% were single females.
And only 8% single males.
Yeah.
So they're over double
Absolutely.
the percentage that they're buying these homes. So I really like that.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if, maybe, I don't know. Why do you think that is?
I think that
They
there's
just have
probably
more knowledge.
They could be, and there's probably a lot more to it, some underlying factors with stats on married couples now.
Or maybe like in my case, she had kids and she wanted to provide them with a home where she's actually building equity.
Absolutely.
So
future wealth.
I think there's not a particular reason behind that stat, but it is quite alarming. I didn't know that single women, 20%, versus 8% for single males that are buying.
Yeah, men, you got to step up your game.
Yeah.
Start building your equity and wealth.
Another stat, 17% of home buyers purchased a multi-generational home for cost savings or to take care of aging parents, or you have a lot of children moving back home. And
Yeah.
so I have seen, especially in our market, these mother-in-law suites, or it may not be like a traditional mother-in-law suite, but a room that is separated from the other
Yep.
rooms that has an ensuite bath, that has an entry exit door. Those properties seem to be outperforming other properties because of that multi-generational need now.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Taking care of aging parents, grandparents, or adult children. I think it's fantastic that families are getting together and helping share, the
absolutely.
cost of living and home ownership, and you pass it down generation to generation. So I think it's a fantastic thing.
I mean, for sure, I would love my mom to have, I'm sure my husband wouldn't agree, but my mom helps out a lot with my
Yeah.
daughter Sawyer. But I would love to have her like a little bungalow at the house.
Yeah.
But you do, you are seeing a lot of people step up and actually taking care of their elderly parents. So it kind of
Absolutely.
like comes back around, because they prefer them, obviously, accessibility, and maybe they don't want them to go into a nursing home. And I think it's great. I love it.
We did. So my grandmother recently passed away, but before
Sorry to
she
hear that, too.
passed, we were looking at assisted living, nursing homes. The cost of an assisted living or nursing home was
Astronomical.
around 7,000
Yeah.
to 8,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's more than, and way more, triple more than, what most people make in a month. So those multi-generational homes are definitely helpful when you need to take care of aging parents.
And I'm sure it could get a little chaotic, but yeah, I think that's why they're so popular.
Yeah.
Today's guest is Heinz Falke, a state certified residential appraiser with over 20 years of experience in Bay and Walton counties. His firm, H.W. Falke Appraisals, serves banks and individuals with expert validation services specializing in high-end custom homes, unique properties, and real estate consulting for sales, purchases, taxes, and litigation. Heinz, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, ladies.
Yeah, so to kick things off, can you tell us what made you decide to become an appraiser? What drew you to this career path?
Well, my mother, when I was younger, worked for a savings and loan. Those are long extinct, but basically a loan officer, and moved down to South Florida and got into real estate. My father was always buying, selling, flipping houses, building spec houses, rental properties. It was just something I kind of grew up around, and when the opportunity arose, I jumped on it and started my profession. Pretty simple. Nothing glorious or nothing glamorous, just decided to go that route.
Gotcha. And so are you a real estate agent as well?
No, just
okay.
a real estate appraiser.
Okay, have you ever been a real estate agent?
I've had a license a long, long time ago, but it's one or the, well, I had to choose one or the other, and consistency-wise back then, the appraisal side was the way to go
Okay.
for me.
But now you can be both, right?
You can. There's not
Okay.
a problem with being both. You can't appraise your own
Right.
listing or purchase, things like that. There's a conflict of interest, but it doesn't hurt to have both.
Okay, and what process do you have to go through to become a licensed appraisal?
So it's
Appraiser.
to be certified, and the license, they used to have a licensed appraiser. It was less of a qualification, but the state of Florida has done away with that, so it's certified. But it changes every 2 years, kind of. It used to be very strict. Now it's a little less stringent because there was a shortage of appraisers, but you have to have a associate's degree or higher. 200 hours, I think, of approved education courses. That would be like your pre-licensing courses to become a trainee appraiser. And then you have to do 1,500 hours of apprenticeship with a certified appraiser.
Wow.
That process takes at a minimum of 1 year, and complete 150 appraisals under the USPAP guidelines before you can sit for your certification. So it's a daunting process, and there's some extra education involved. And then, of course, every 2 years you're doing 40 hours of continuing education. So it's a commitment.
And so for the 1,500 hours, you say that a lot of people in trying to become an appraiser, they can knock that out in a year, or is that?
Yeah, well, it's a minimum of 1 year to knock out the.
Gotcha.
If you knock out 1,500 hours in 9 months, you still have to be
You go
a
full
trainee under a certified appraiser for a 1-year minimum. It used to be 2 years, and they reduced it down to 1.
And can you pick your mentor?
You can.
Oh,
That's the hard
nice.
part. Nobody wants to be a mentor
Right.
because if
a lot
you're
of work.
busy, you have to stop what you're doing, and you can't sit. It's not like I can send a trainee appraiser on their own
Right.
and report back to me with an appraisal. I have to physically be at every step and turn with that trainee, so it takes you back a little bit.
Okay.
Have you mentored appraisers before?
I
through
have
this
mentored
journey?
one,
Okay.
and that was enough.
And that was
That-
enough?
yeah, it's a long process, and it was back then. It was 2 years and 2,500 hours.
Okay.
So I had him tagging along for 2 years.
Wow.
Whoever mentored you, are they still working right now? Do
They
you
are.
know them?
They are. We remained extremely close.
Yeah.
And then with the one that I mentored, we are extremely close and live right around the corner from each other.
That's cool.
So and we help each other, and we try to have a tight knit group that gets to bounce things off of each other, so we do the best job we can possibly do.
That's awesome. I kind of have a two-part question. What is your typical appraisal process from start to finish? But also, we've heard that appraisers are assigned work through an online portal system. Is that true? And can you walk us through how appraisals are assigned?
So that is true in most part. The management companies are involved, and what that is a middleman to keep out the fraud and everything else. Back in a long time ago, we would, as appraisers, get in with a bank. That bank would like you, use you. We would spend holidays going to the drive-throughs, dropping off gift baskets and gift cards to maintain your good standing. And then the crash came and the fraud happened, and they implemented management companies, bigger banks, national banks. Some of them have their own dedicated appraisal departments, but yes, they'll send it to an appraiser on a rotation. So it's a blind kind of draw, and we go, and that's how we're assigned orders now in today's time. And then the process begins on preparing the appraisal, and that's a different ballgame. But we're assigned individual appraisals from a management company or bank.
Are you given a time frame on how soon you have to return that appraisal?
Yeah, most of the time they like it within 3 to 5 days, 5 to 7 days. I mean, complexities get involved and it extends it out sometimes, but there's an industry standard that they try to turn it rather quickly.
I've heard, just working with VA buyers a lot, some VA lenders say that there's like a 14-day limit.
Yeah, I mean, VA has a separate kind of set of guidelines. They're very consistent with the industry standard, but there are certain things, time frames, caps on fees, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So you're not competing for these appraisals. You're getting assigned from that bank, whether it's Centennial or
Right. If you're on their
Truist.
panel, then you are receiving orders, and it's just when you're up, you're up. You
Gotcha.
can take it or not take it.
So you have the opportunity to say, I don't want it.
Oh yeah, I mean we pass on stuff all the time.
Why would you pass on something?
Time frame, fee may be too low. If you request more of a fee and they're like, no, we'll try to get it to the lower bidder for our customer or even us, then that's the case. But if it doesn't align with what I want to do, I would pass and let the next guy have it.
So how many banks locally do you work with?
Quite a few, if not most
All
all
of
of them locally. And I think at one point, years and years ago, I kind of tallied it up, and I had, probably 50 or 60 clients comprised of management companies and national banks and mortgage lenders and things like that. But it's well over 50.
And you do independent appraisals as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We love doing those more than we like bank work, to be honest with you, because we really get to put, what we learn and the knowledge that we gain from the market into a package that would actually help somebody. There's not a difference in the appraisal process per se for those two products, like a private party appraisal or a bank appraisal. It's the use that the appraisal is being prepared for. Mortgage loan underwriting. It's a risk analysis in a sense that they're going to use this to make a loan decision. For a private party, let's say you had a client that you really wanted to figure out what the best listing price for that property was. It was kind of complex, or the market's changing and there's some uncertainty. Well, the product that we would prepare is very comprehensive and weighs heavily on inventory analysis and market trends and things like that. Well, we still provide that for the banks, but we can really focus on where is this property going to sell at, how long is it going to take to sell it, and what can they expect as offering prices,
Right.
whether they be low, in the middle, or high.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you've done this before, but just say you go to a listing presentation and you are so far off on what you believe the house will sell for in this market or what it's worth versus what the seller thinks is worth. So that's something that I do. I'll suggest, I'll say, hey, here's a list of appraisers that I recommend. Your name is on it always.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Which this is the first day we've actually met in person, which is funny, but
It's like that all the time for
yeah.
me. I run into people all the time like that.
But I'm just like, hey, we're so far off. Why don't you get an independent appraisal, done on the house to see what but you can't use that appraisal for, if a buyer actually, you go under contract with a buyer, because that has to come from the lender.
Correct, because it comes down to the guidelines that we have. It's the USPAP, Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. That's kind of what governs us. And, they have specific uses. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they have to be the bank has to be the client, and we have to report to the client. That appraisal has to be prepared for a specific use for one client, and that use would be mortgage loan underwriting. So they don't travel.
Gotcha.
People, that's kind of a misconception in the general public, is they think that these documents travel. They don't travel. It's unfortunate that they don't, but that purpose is completely different from what the bank's using their purpose for.
Right.
I know they don't travel, but in negotiations for agent to agent, it's nice to have that outside appraisal and say, look, it appraised for this. I
Exactly.
think we're safe by saying it will appraise again for something similar.
Correct, and I promise you that appraiser that prepared that appraisal will stand behind it, and if there is any issues coming down the line with a bank appraisal or a bank ordered appraisal, I'm sure that they would be right there to help defend it. I do it all the time. Whatever, if I sign something, I'm going to defend it as long as it is correct, until it expires. Or the market changes is when it expires,
Okay, when the market adjusts is when it expires.
Yeah, there's no real time. People say, oh, it's good for 6 months. VA has a thing where you can't. There's an expiration date or a time limit on them, but it's not for that. It's not for that reason. But an appraisal is as good and will be good until the market changes and it says, okay, it's more or less or whatever.
Now, in these banks, they set fees, right? Is it for, say you take Regions, let's just say Regions.
Okay.
Do they have different fees for each appraisal, or is it pretty much a standard fee across the board that they will pay?
There's a standard fee for a standard appraisal, okay? And in their mind, sometimes their fees adjust based on contract price. And that may insinuate that it's a more complex property, which isn't always the case. I mean, take, something on the 30A market in Rosemary Beach or something like that. There's an abundance of sales, $2-3 million, right? That doesn't make it complex because there's 5 sales next to this property,
Right.
and you could have a $120,000 property that's extremely complex. So they may say, okay, this is a high-end property because it's this much money. We'll give them the appraiser more. And I could look at something completely opposite and say, I kind of need more money for this because it's going to take me 8 hours instead of 4 hours.
Right.
But there's a standard benchmark fee, and each bank is different, unfortunately. We as appraisers get together and we try to advocate for something more solid and consistent, but there's really not.
And how many times a week are you pressing that I accept?
As many times as possible.
Nice.
I've got my
So you
sweet
can-
wife over there that makes me press the button, and if I'm not pressing it, she is.
Okay, so it's kind of like similar in a sense to realtors too. You can kind of work as much as you want.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have to accept.
It's self-paced and
But so
self-driven, yeah.
If you go on vacation, you're just out of pocket for that week.
Nobody's
and-
getting paid. That's right.
Nice.
That's right.
But it's worth it.
It is. The week before vacation is not, because you
Right.
do an extra week's worth of work before you
Absolutely.
leave. So that's the daunting part. But
I like
everybody,
it.
but that's where we are in this industry.
Okay, so pools are always a hot topic. How do you approach appraising a home with a pool? What kind of value adjustment does that usually bring?
Okay, that is a hot topic.
Yes.
And it's a question I get asked a lot. There's really no rubber stamp adjustment for anything. If you see something consistent and you look at a lot of appraisals, sometimes they seem like it, but there is truly no rubber stamp. The easiest way to answer that question is I would try to find, if my subject property had a pool, I would hope to find all my properties having pools and not have to make that adjustment.
What about the other way around though?
If it's the other way around and I don't have a pool and I find a house that has really great similar physical characteristics and it unfortunately has a pool, I'm going to, apply something that we call, a paired data analysis or a group data analysis, where I'm going to take several similar properties, make them as similar as possible, leaving only the pool, and determine what that contribution is. You can do it in a group setting, you can do it in a paired setting, and that'll give me an idea of what that contribution of a pool is. Now, and it could be different anytime and every time. So,
I mean, yeah, because I think when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, 2005, 2006, my mom got a pool. I think she paid $13,000 for it. And then the screen enclosure was $8,000. So you're all in for $20,000.
Right.
This is 20 years ago. Okay.
correct.
Now
You're
it's
all in
nothing.
for 75 at least,
At,
you know.
at bare
least.
minimum 75. If you're doing a huge, pavers and screen and enclosure, you're 125, 150 easy. So are you giving that adjustment if you see, okay, this pool was installed a couple years ago? Like, I'm not talking about pools 20 years ago. Like,
Right.
is there,
It's based on it's based on today's prices, but always the easiest way is to try to find the most similar properties. That's a viable property. What would somebody consider in the same pool of properties a viable purchase alternative, right? We'd hope that they'd all have pools or they all wouldn't have pools. That's not always the case, but it's a difficult thing. And I know some questions that you have talk about depreciation and stuff like that. And that is a way to help. Depreciation is more of a cost related part of the valuation process, but we can use it to get an idea. If they paid $100,000 for the pool and it's 2 years old, we can use the age life method to kind of figure out depreciation, and that will help. But whatever I say the pool is worth, it goes to the bank, it goes to the lender. The underwriter looks at it. They would want me to have an equally valuable pool at $100,000 for a comp. They like it to be square peg, square hole. You give them a round peg and a square hole, and it blows their mind. So the process is extremely
complicated.
and I hate that I don't have a simple
Right.
answer.
Yeah, I mean, because when I started 6 years ago. She's been in it way longer than me. But we have these comparative market analysis that we do,
Right.
Which help us come up with what a property's worth. And I saw adjustments like $20,000. Well, you can't get anything.
No.
I mean, you're getting above ground pool, maybe. Not.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
you know what I mean. Maybe not an in ground.
And let me shed some light on that, because when you break down an appraisal, and especially that part of the appraisal, which is the sales comparison grid, where all the adjustments and the magic happens, you'll see a $20,000 adjustment, but that doesn't mean that pool is $20,000. That means that is the contribution, or what the appraiser had to apply to that to equalize it with the other properties, the subject, the other comparables, things like that. So it doesn't mean that, oh, this pool is worth $20,000. It is the amount given to make it equal to. There are other factors involved.
Right. If there's like a separated garage or a shop,
Yeah,
or
and
something.
all these things are coming into play, and they're
Right.
all falling down like
Yeah.
dominoes until at the end you have a number. And so it's not, people get focused on that number, but that doesn't mean that the pool is 20,000. It means that is what it took to get it
Gotcha.
to equalize.
So would you leave a neighborhood? Say we have a neighborhood in Lynn Haven. Let's just say the Landings.
Okay.
Or Grants Mill, whatever, over in that area. And you have a subject property, no pool, and then you have 6 recent sales. I'd say last 6 months, they all have pools. Would you leave that neighborhood to try to find a house that's comparable to that one that doesn't have a pool, over trying to compare it to similar properties, similar age with pools?
I would have to, because
So-
the lender would require that
So
bracketing.
So okay. So
Okay.
you wouldn't want to make those adjustments based on.
I would use as many in that location, because that is where you get your
Right.
best perspective of value for that property. But in order to meet their requirements, I would go somewhere else that I would feel that a buyer would consider. If I can't get one in here, then I will take one over there. And that now has opened up my area and expanded my search. As long as it's a viable location, right? And I would find one that didn't have one, and then I would meet that bank's criteria. Now, if I was doing one for an individual and I really felt solid about a pool adjustment, I wouldn't meet that criteria, because I wouldn't need to. That's not a guideline that I have to adhere to.
And do you use, I guess I've seen minimum 3 comps, but I've seen up to 6 comparable properties. But you're saying you would leave get a property without a pool and then maybe have a property with a pool as well.
Sure, I'd figure out if the sale trends were the same in that particular neighborhood without pools, things like that. But I mean, it all boils down to if I can't have one there, if I'm speaking as a buyer and I cannot have one here, what's my next best option? And that, to me, as an appraiser, opens up another area where I can search for comps. If they wouldn't consider it, then neither would I.
Excellent.
What do you do in a situation where someone's not happy with an appraisal with a lender and same scenario without a lender?
I block the number.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding.
Go on, go on.
No, that happens
Take
a
it
lot.
or leave it.
Yeah.
With a lender or without? Or say
With
that.
a lender, I know there's a process sometimes, Tidewater with VA
Yep.
and another process with FHA and conventional. But also without a lender, if someone's not happy and they kind of want to argue over the appraisal number, what's your process?
Well, it's easier to handle that process with the person without a lender because ideally, or they would probably be the client of this, or the real estate agent would have been the client on behalf of that person and obviously grant the appraiser the ability to talk to them.
Yeah.
So it's easier to go through an appraisal line by line, explain the logic, explain everything to an individual, and then talk about it and come to a conclusion whether they change your mind or help, because I mean, there are points that can be brought up about a home that the appraiser may not realize right away. I'm guilty of it too. Some physical characteristic of the home is much more appealing and much more in demand right now. And sometimes you guys, as real estate agents, see that faster than we do. It takes time for us to process the data over a period of time where you're seeing it with your clients right away. Hey, I have to have a 4-bedroom house, and I'm willing to pay a little extra for it. Well, to me, that's something that is noteworthy. And so we can talk about that with the client. With a lender, it's different. The homeowner or buyer will initiate a reconsideration of value with the help of the real estate agent. Now, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are putting in place guidelines for us to really treat those serious. And I think they should be treated serious. And so that's the course of action for a lender, but it's much easier to deal with an individual as a client that is not using a lender. They're using this appraisal for something else to talk about the value and talk about the process.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of times my client will come to me and will say, okay, this is a hot mess. Let's write something up. Let's get a comp that maybe the appraiser will consider. Oh, this is a 5-bedroom house. It's a 4-bedroom on the report. Let's challenge this, So we'll write up a nice thing and we go straight to the lender. I'm not going to you.
Right,
correct?
you have to. Right,
Right.
because the appraiser has a client confidentiality agreement with
Right.
the lender. And per USPAP, we can only convey any results of the appraisal that are not public record to the client.
And so the buyer's agent or the listing agent can provide comps.
Sure.
How likely are you to review this? I know you said we do take them into consideration, but I mean, is there sometimes you just look at this and you're like, child, please?
A
Like,
lot of times.
I've been
There's
doing this for, 20 years?
20 plus years, yes.
So if you got,
Shots.
a realtor, and you're like, no. Is there a lot of times you run into that?
I do, and it all boils down to, and this is a big thing, it boils down to the fact that what they consider to be a viable purchase alternative or a comparable property is it not.
Mhm.
They've chased a price per square foot, and you can chase price per square foot easily by using a smaller home because smaller
Right.
homes have bigger price per square foots, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if you're going that route, it's real easy to submit a reconsideration of value with that being geared towards price per square foot. So we shoot down those all the time because they make no sense. We're
not
going to
a
make
legitimate
adjustments, correct.
argument.
But if there is a legitimate one, then and it may have been passed over by the appraiser, then it is a reconsideration.
How often has that happened with you where you have changed your report and said, you know what? You're right. I'm wrong. Here it is. I'm just curious.
I'll give you an honest answer. Never.
We like honest
Okay.
answers.
I do like honest
But now that doesn't mean that I have not got them and I have not
replied
and talked to
professional-
everybody and
respect.
explained the situation because
Yes.
we're looking at the same comparable properties.
Absolutely.
If you have one that maybe was off market, obviously those are always great as long as we can get the information and it's detailed enough to satisfy our guidelines to use that as a comparable property and not just word of mouth, things like that. But I think and I don't mean that in a way that with zero being that I'm that good. I just try my hardest to pick the best properties as comparable sales.
Absolutely.
And if you start with that route, you have less of that. So it does take me a little longer to write an appraisal. I don't leave any stones unturned.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do fall short, I try to speak to whomever and not plead my case, but say, hey, this is where we're at because of this.
That's a good point. It depends on the appraiser. I have a story to tell you where we did have a reconsideration of value, but it ended up where the appraiser, I don't know what happened to her. And then they went ahead and did like an in-house appraisal because the appraisal was so bad. I had a buyer under contract and they were buying a waterfront property in the Cove. All the comps that she pulled were non-waterfront property, and 2 of them were in Cove Point, non-waterfront property, where our property, our subject, was deep water on the bay.
Yeah.
So, problem. So I did an reconsideration of value, and I ended up having to pull a couple from Donaldson Point, and that would probably be similar water depth, and they were similar homes, different area. We just had to go a little further out. They ended up doing, I don't know if they used any of the comps that I pulled, but they ended up doing an in-house appraisal or a desk appraisal.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that, or how does that process work where an appraiser, their appraisal is no longer considered?
It happens more than you think, but it's not hugely common, but it does happen. And yeah, a desk appraisal it's not necessarily them doing an appraisal. It'll either be, they'll send that appraisal to another certified appraiser that's on their panel. They'll either have it reviewed or they'll do what they call a desktop, where you have some information enough to formulate the physical characteristics of that property and things like that, and its condition and quality, and you can do it from the desk. And we'll provide that to the lender for review, and they'll set them alongside each other and kind of say, okay, well, this one makes much more sense, or neither of them makes sense. It's just one of those. It's one of those things. But it happens often.
Yeah. And I think that's where sometimes you have a lot of realtors that emotions get high because it's not a standard. You're not going to get the same. If you have 10 appraisers appraise the same house, you'll have 10 different values, I assure you. And I think that's where realtors, myself speaking, there's no standard across the line because you can justify it. It's kind of like with our CMAs, we can really justify it. If you have a
you
seller,
can lead it the direction that you want to lead it for sure.
You can definitely lead it, and you really have to be as fair as possible. But there are some bad appraisers out there. I would say I wouldn't say bad appraisers. I would just say maybe they're overworked or maybe they just overlooked something. But that's what causes issues, and that's why they have this reconsideration. And we have Tidewater as well.
Right, and they're Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are making regulatory changes, and the reconsiderations of value are much more.
That's good to hear.
Predominant, and we treat them differently. As before, it was, oh, this person is arguing with me. They don't know what they're talking about. This realtor doesn't know what they're talking about. That's not the case.
Right.
Sometimes there are bad appraisers, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of speaking engagement at real estate offices trying to promote.
There's bad golfers. There's
bad everything. There are bad apples everywhere you go. But yeah, we try to. I for one, and a colleague of mine, Chris Woods, we do a lot of speaking engagements, and we try to promote this across the board. Where if we're all thinking this way, or how we're thinking, it helps you. Our guidelines, what we have to do, how we apply the process. It helps to put everybody on the same page. If everybody was on the same page, we'd have less deals blowing up. We'd have less bad appraisers. I can only speak for the 3 that I talk to on a regular basis. And everybody, those 3, I don't think anybody here or listening will have a problem with them. But there are people out there that don't apply the same principles and practices.
Right. And just going back to the Tidewater, the reason why I like the term Tidewater, and you can correct me because you know this better than I do, but basically this gives it basically an appraiser is letting the lender know the home is not going to appraise at the contract price. That could be $50 under, or it could be 50,000 under.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
We don't know that, but it's letting the lender know, hey, what I'm coming up with in my report is not matching what the contract price is on this property. But it gives us an opportunity to go through that process before you release the report. Correct.
Correct. That's right.
And that's why I love those, because
Yeah.
I feel like you have a lot more success with those because you can get in front of it. Whereas on the other end of
Yeah.
the spectrum, the report's there. It's going to be really hard to get an appraiser to change that report once it's submitted and through the system.
Right. And and that's why there's multiple comps, because and a range of value, and I don't think, I mean, it's a great example of 50 to 50,000, but the 50,000 is significant. The 50
Right.
or 5,000, even sometimes it may
Right.
fall within that range. And that's a lot of times the appraisers have the ability to reconcile with their opinion, because it's an opinion. Say, okay, well, I mean, I see it's in this range somewhere, and the contract is here. That's obviously, a contract indicates that there's a willing buyer and seller, and we're very much in an arm's length transaction scenario. So why can't we fall in that range?
I'm sure you saw so many appraisals coming in low right after COVID, 21, 22, compared to now, right? There has to be like you're seeing, I feel like what I'm experiencing is more coming in at value or over versus a couple years ago where, people were paying well over what the appraisal was coming in at.
That and there's already regulatory guidelines in place because of that. And now at Appraiser, it started last month. We have to analyze the market a little more specifically and make time adjustments if they're warranted. That will eliminate if we do have a surge. Now, there's always a limitation, but now we have to say, does this warrant a time adjustment, whether it's positive or negative? There are negative adjustments out there right now.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and I mean, I just saw homes, they're going up 20% in a year, whereas normally it's 3 to 5%, right?
And that's case specific and sub-market specific. It could be that much here, and it could be a lot less over here, and
Right.
and you average them all together with all these great platforms like Zillow and stuff like that. But it's very case specific.
Do you take cash sales into consideration? Because I hear this a lot, and it could just be a rumor. That's why I want to ask you the question. It's been put out there that some appraisers do not take a cash sale as an actual comparable for a property because that person paid cash and they didn't go through the whole appraisal process. Maybe,
No,
on
and that listen, if a cash sale is an outlier and it is much greater or much lower than what's consistently here, then yes,
You
it would
throw
be
it
an
out.
outlier. You would throw it out.
Throw it out.
But a cash sale doesn't mean it. We just went through one of the biggest cash,
Oh,
purchase trends in our market's history over the past, 2 years, where everybody was paying cash.
where's
Well,
this cash coming from, Heinz? It's
I would love to know, because it's certainly
Equity.
not in my bank account.
Equity and moving from other states,
Yeah.
New York, California.
Yeah,
all
you
that
sell
cash
something
is
high
king.
there, and you can buy something really great here. But yeah, and so we can't rule out all those sales. And you put them in MLS. You write the process is this. I mean, I can see where an outlier would be excluded, and I
Right.
exclude outliers. But if it's consistent with everything else,
You're gonna
it's
consider
consistent
it.
with everything else.
When you're looking at comparable sales, how do you handle homes built by bulk builders like D.R. Horton compared to custom built homes? Do you make any specific adjustments between the two?
I love this question because I just had
I
one
love asking
last
this
week.
question.
So if I have a track builder home appraisal, I'm going to use track builder home comps. If I have a owner built or custom home, I'm going to exclude those and use only those. I had one in the Southport area, a nice home, but guess what's in the Southport area? All those track builder neighborhoods are around there. I told my wife, I said, if the underwriters ask me to
Why?
consider any of these D.R. Horton comps because I'm $100,000 higher on my appraised value, I'm going to lose it. Well, they didn't. I wrote a nice, some nice verbiage saying, hey, these are not comparable. They're lower cost
You had to
alternatives. They're
explain to them.
economy built. I have to explain that to the underwriter so that I get ahead of my questions that they're going to ask me. None came back. I feel I explained it enough, and everything was fine. But I try to keep it in that submarket. And I think everybody should, whether you're pricing homes, selling homes, or appraising homes.
I agree 1,000% because you do have specific neighborhoods that maybe they're predominantly D.R. Horton or Adams, but then you have a handful of custom built homes, which everybody knows. I'm not saying D.R. Horton's cheap or anything like that. They just get the materials at a cheaper price
Well, because they
they're
build in
ordering
bulk. Correct.
So it's, to me, super unfair to when it costs so much less to build this house versus a one-on-one house. So that's interesting. I'm
Yeah,
glad you
I mean
said
that's
that.
right. And everybody should apply that practice. I mean it's the right thing to do. But now there is an adverse to that, and if there is nothing but these tract builder economy based houses around you, it's going to squeeze out or reduce your value ceiling, and there's always that, and that there's that adverse effect that can happen. So it may hurt you in the long run, not hurt you, but it may impact your value ceiling or how you're going to appreciate alongside everybody else because there's just more inventory.
So that's something for a buyer to keep in mind if you're
Yeah.
wanting to build a home, a custom home in a neighborhood that's, has all these
Just look
specs.
around you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that you possibly will leave that neighborhood to find.
Absolutely. And again, I know several appraisers that have that same logic, and we all feel that that's the right thing to do.
And underwriting is just evaluating the risk for the loan. So they're seeing, oh, Heinz, why are you 100,000 over?
Right,
There's 3 homes right next to it.
Exactly.
So
And then you
that's why
have to make that
explain.
explanation as to
Okay.
why.
Perfect.
How do you account for factors such as depreciation, obsolescence, and market demand in your appraisals?
So the depreciation, like I was saying before, is really more cost related, but can be used as a backup to kind of gain some perspective on an adjustment that you might have to make. The age life, theory is great, but we try to keep everything the same age. We try to close to the same age within the same parameters, things like that. So we don't have to make those adjustments because, depreciation is not as accurate, and especially with all the factors that the home can have. So we keep that on the cost side and try to not do that on the comparable sale side, which is the more appropriate way to value a home. And obsolescence, it's the same thing. If it's functional obsolescence or external obsolescence, we try to find comps that are the same way. If they're backing up to a power line easement, things like that, we try to find another sale like that. And the lenders and the underwriters would prefer that, busy roads, that we have something on a busy road. But we just try to keep everything in line and try to find those similar properties so that we don't have to really dig deep into what that is from a marketing standpoint. I mean, somebody might, if there's another home available that isn't backing up to a Florida power and light easement and you have a power pole in your backyard, they may choose that over yours, so you may have to be competitive. That kind of falls on the marketing side and the agent side when we're preparing this property to be sold, but we'll look at it, but we'll ideally try to find something similar in that regard.
What about, after Hurricane Michael, I feel like everyone got a remodeling budget. Well, hopefully, if you're lucky, you got a remodeling budget. But you have maybe an older home, maybe a 1990 home, but now that home was gutted down to the studs. Everything is new. I mean, we don't have tile countertops anymore. We have quartz.
Right.
So how do you handle that? I know basically, ideally, you would want to compare it to another remodel.
And they're in abundance because of Hurricane
Right.
Michael. So it's no matter how you look at it,
But that can
it's
get
not a
tricky.
new home.
That can get tricky because the seller can be like, I spent $150,000 on these upgrades, and neighbor B over here, Mr. Smith, he had his, he thought he got on Pinterest and did a do-it-yourselfer, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you go into a house, can you say, okay, this is a homeowner that did this, and this was actually a
Sure,
contractor?
you can tell
Do
the
you make
quality
adjustments
difference.
on
I
that?
mean, I
On
try.
quality?
The less adjustments an appraiser can make, the more credible the appraisal is, right?
Okay.
Because adjustments boil down to an opinion and a formula that we have learned over the course of our career, or there's an industry standard for because it's complex. And the less adjustments, the better. So the more comparable properties you find, if you have a hodgepodge remodel, I look
You're not
for
gonna use it.
hodgepodge remodels.
Okay.
If I have a high-end remodel, I look for high-end remodels. Every now and again, I'll put something on, like a new construction here. Like, here's where it separates to new construction. Here's needing to be remodeled. And put a couple in between, and here's where we are. You try to paint them the easiest picture to make a decision, right? So you may have to use a contrasting data set to do that, but it paints the best picture. But I try to keep it within the lanes, and that's gives you the most credible opinion of value. If I'm not having to make adjustments or many adjustments, then I feel like those are the most comparable properties.
Because, I mean, you might have someone that's putting in Viking appliances and then you have Frigidaire.
Yeah, and you would, I mean, that it's always going to be, there's going to be an adjustment. I mean, you're going to have to,
Right.
but again, that person that's putting in a Viking and Frigidaire commercial grade appliance
Probably shouldn't
package
have done that.
might be the chicken riding the horse theory,
Right.
and he might be,
Know
a
your
super
neighborhood.
adequacy for his neighborhood.
Right.
So you have to consider that as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so another hot topic.
Oh, great.
What impact do solar panels have when you're appraising a home? Are there any standard adjustments you make if a property has solar, and what does that process typically look like?
Well, it boils down to, again, on the paired data analysis, right? I will find home sales with solar panels, home sales without, make them similar until all I have left is the solar panels, and somewhere in that process, I'm going to have some type of adjustment for solar panels if it's warranted. Now, I will tell you, this is where it always gets questionable and people get heated over it.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a loan on those solar panels,
60,000.
they're Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and every lender around here that is going to have that loan go on the secondary market cannot have a value assigned to something that is not real property or that they do not own. Okay? And the kicker is, oh yeah, we're paying it off at closing. The appraiser's there before closing. We have an effective date of value. They say absolutely has to be paid off on or before the appraiser's effective date of value for them to be considered as real property.
Which is not going to happen because most people don't have it to pay it
Correct.
off. Otherwise, they would have just done it to begin with.
Correct.
And they're using those net proceeds, if they have any at closing, to pay it off.
Because they have to, because
So
they have a
you're
lien on the
saying
property.
For you to take it into consideration, it has to be paid off before you go there that day.
Yeah,
Or that
or
day.
that day.
Or that day.
So to be considered real property, that means that the property has to appraise without the value of the solar panels being there.
No, real property is something that's affixed to the property that,
Right.
and granted it's affixed pretty good. Like, appliances are real property,
Right.
Not a refrigerator, not a washer and dryer. You can wheel those in and out. You can do that with a stove, but they call, dishwashers, things that are bolted down, real property.
Right.
Okay, so that will fall under real property. And so would solar panels. However, if they're not paid off, they have no contribution, or they are not, they may have one. Now, don't get that confused. We just can't assign them any value because they're not paid off.
Okay.
They could be taken off, and at any point,
Right.
and
that
all of a
makes
sudden,
sense.
the value assigned is no longer there.
So that's why you're trying to compare that property to other properties with solar. So
Correct.
You might go 10 miles out to find.
If I had to formulate some type of adjustment, ideally all my comps would need to be in a viable location. But if I have to go out there for an adjustment or a bracketing, I would do so, and then I might have to make a location adjustment. And again, then we're dealing with more adjustments, less credibility. But ideally, you want to find sales with, sales without.
I feel like that would be a very daunting process because there are some people that buy 50,000, whatever.
Oh, I know.
And then they'll move like the next year or 3 years.
I know.
It's a big pet peeve of mine. But even when I drive through neighborhoods, when I see solar, I'm like, no, brand new houses. So I think it would be a little daunting to find the sales that you need because a lot of people, they probably, after they do the math, are like, okay, maybe I should hold on to these for a little longer.
That and it's a solar, I don't think has taken off like we all had hoped as yet. It's a process, and their creative marketing strategy with the door knockers that are persistent and don't take no for an answer. That's it. I mean, that's how you sell solar panels.
Right. Yeah.
And they don't always give you the money back. And their life expectancy isn't, there are certain things that make it hard to have and cost doesn't equal value. We all know that. We learned that early on in this industry on both sides. It's what somebody's willing to pay, not what it costs.
Right.
So that solar panels are no different.
And I think too, it's about a poll too. It's kind of, it's apples and oranges, but if you're paying $150,000 for a whole pool oasis, you're not necessarily going to get that out
Right.
of it.
And typically that's meant to be spread over the lifetime of this property and the use that you have in this property. And so if you're looking for an immediate return, it's not one of those things. It's more of a depreciating item than the real estate that it's setting on.
Right.
So we know that with a VA and FHA loan, there's always condition requirements because they're government-backed loans. Can you explain the difference between a home inspection and an appraisal, and how in-depth you get with viewing condition requirements for a property?
Certainly. I mean, that's a great question. A home inspection is prepared for the buyer or the individual, and it may never, ever come across the bank's desk or the underwriter's desk. The appraisal is prepared for that use of underwriting a mortgage loan and an approval process. So they're two different things. The inspector is doing a deep dive on the mechanical systems, the quality condition code violations or, no code violations, things like that. The appraiser is visually viewing this with an industry standard, and in a HUD-backed loan or a VA, for their insurability, there is a more stringent set of requirements that we're looking at. But in the grand scheme of things, we defer, and every one of my appraisals, I say, the best way to do this is have a home inspection. If there are items in the home inspection, send them to me. I'll determine whether or not they impact the marketability or the value or both. And so I'll recommend home inspections, but they are two different processes and two different uses.
And we hear a lot about, VA appraisals being more stringent, especially on the repair
Right.
aspect. Not myself, but I had a coworker, it was her listing, and the VA appraiser wrote up that there was dog poop in the backyard and needed to be cleaned. I don't know if I would see that on a FHA or conventional, but I mean, is that true?
Well, he probably stepped in it and got mad.
and got-
So
That's
that
probably what
It
happened.
became emotional.
correct. Yeah,
So are they more stringent? I know you kind of really touched on it, like a VA appraisal.
any HUD-backed or VA appraisal, like I said, they have a different set of guidelines. You definitely have to look a little deeper. It's
Is
not.
that
It's
even
not
on price as well, or just kind of on the repair aspect?
on when you say price. Is it the price of the repair?
Like more just looking to make sure that that property is going to appraise for the contract price, because
In its present condition, yeah,
Right.
sure. Those things correlate. I mean, they're together on that. But yeah, you look deeper. But I will tell you that the conventional loan process, they're adopting a lot of these standards because
Wow.
the insurability of the loan with the FDIC and certain things like that are going to fall under. It has to pass. And so a conventional loan, they're looking for certain condition factors too. It's just more predominant and more localized and focused on in a HUD-backed or a VA type appraisal. But yeah, where you look at there's a set of checklists that you go through.
Okay. Do you do commercial appraisals or just residential?
Just residential.
Okay, interesting. 'Cause, so from your background, an FHA appraisal will be less stringent than a conventional and VA.
No, they're
They're all
HUD-backed,
HUD-backed.
and
Okay.
that would be USDA,
Right.
FHA, and then you have your VA appraisals.
Right.
They have a more stringent
And
set of
you're saying
inspection guidelines.
kind of the view was, conventional's more relaxed, but they're kind of catching
They're
up.
they are tightening the
Right.
rope on that for sure.
Gotcha.
And it's always, let me just say one thing. It's always good that if you can call an appraiser and ask them, hey, there are certain items that I'm concerned about condition-wise. Is this something that is going to impact the appraisal, or will it be conditioned for repair? Things like that. I get those calls all the time. Then those things change constantly.
Can I ask you something about windows on a VA?
Sure.
Just because I get this question so much and I feel like it's important. On a VA, it used to be that fogged windows were not allowed. I just had one, well, not just, it was a couple years ago, where not only did it have fogged windows, it had boarded up windows, and it passed VA with flying colors on an as-is contract. Can you shed light on what the requirement is as far as windows go?
From an FHA standpoint and some of the HUD-backed stuff, it changes, and I mean, I'm telling you, it is constantly having to be kept up with. But now, I boarded up, I don't think you can have because you have to be able to get out.
I was
And
wondering.
that's no burglar bars unless they have the quick release, no boarded up windows. Fogged windows are okay. A cracked window, if there's a double pane and one's cracked and one's not, they'll pass that nowadays.
Wow.
You know, and then a lot of times it goes back to the underwriter. And if they don't like what they see or what they read, they'll condition it because the lender has a obligation to sign off on it as well.
Yeah, make sure it's structurally sound and safety.
Correct.
The two
Sound,
prime points.
safety, soundness, and security.
Okay.
Because they're looking at that report and you have to provide pictures. So
Oh,
if
yeah.
they see something, they're like, wait a second, Heinz, what about this?
Correct. They have a larger photo requirement, so we're taking all sides. We're taking pictures of
wow.
mechanical, things like that. So they'll look at it, and you know, we're looking at it, we're recommending things, and then it ultimately goes to them for a decision.
How long are you typically at a property?
Depends on the size, but probably about half an hour to an hour, you know, and obviously it can go bigger
Yeah.
houses, more complex properties, but the appraisal inspection, I don't want to confuse it with an inspection. It is an inspection in the sense of the word, but it's an appraisal inspection. And I'm looking at it from a visual standpoint with a certain set of industry standards and guidelines, and then going in on the assumption that everything that I don't see is in good working order. And that doesn't take that long.
Would you write up, say, and you have to go into these homes, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that's one
Unless the
question.
lender says we'll take it from the street, which
Okay.
opens up a whole nother set of,
Right.
you know, extraordinary assumptions and hypothetical conditions.
When do you usually see that? Usually on tract homes or D.R. Horton developments?
What,
where-
not going in?
Yeah.
Every now and again, and if it's based on the loan. It's based on the loan amount, the way they order the exterior. They really want an appraiser to go inside and out and do a full appraisal on the property. If they just bought it or they don't owe a lot of money on it and the loan to value ratio is going to be no problem no matter what it appraises for, they may say just drive by it and give us an exterior only.
Like someone taking off PMI? because
Sure.
they don't-
Yeah, but if it
Okay.
comes down to it where it could go either way, they'll order
Go
a
inside.
full, you know,
Yeah.
appraisal.
What about, say you go into a house, and because we get a lot where the tenant wants to purchase the home, right?
Sure.
The tenant's been living there for a number of years. Now they've built up, they have some money where they can actually purchase the home. And have you ever walked into a situation where you go in and there's not necessarily anything wrong with the house on the interior, exterior, but it's like hoarder's paradise where you could barely walk through. I'm talking like episode of Hoarders where there's a hallway and you can barely fit into that house. Will you write that up? Like, would that be
No.
something you would write up?
Not really. That's kind of, no.
Good to
And
know.
I've seen all that. I've got
I'm sure
fleas.
you've
I've left
seen-
with fleas.
Oh,
I've
man.
couldn't get into rooms because of, you know, hoarders, but I try to envision that house vacant, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And they could have condos have terrible furniture packages all the time.
Right.
And then, you know, and since furniture doesn't really technically have, you know, value in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's eyes, and it's not real property, we just picture it vacant. So that wicker 1980s furniture package, you know, isn't a big deal. And neither is the hoarder, because if it's a sale or even a refinance, whatever, I mean, if the bank takes it back, they're going to clean it up and they're going to sell it.
Gotcha.
So that stuff is not going to be in there. So we can not consider that.
What's the craziest thing you've seen when you go out of these properties? I'm just curious.
I mean, just people's weird quirks and
Oh,
their
yeah.
weird collections, and you know, I mean, fleas was terrible. Having to-
Collections, like
yeah, well, just the things that they have
Snakes
that's
and-
it's snakes, spiders, lions, tigers,
That
bears,
they want to show you.
and then
when you get
sometimes they're very proud of what they have accumulated
Yes.
over their life and whatnot. But I don't want to get too specific because somebody could be listening and they're like, "Oh, that was my house."
You're like, that was my Star Wars collection that I was showing off. Okay.
I love it. Hey, how do you stay updated on market trends and industry developments?
That's real easy doing, you know, 400 to 500 appraisals a year. You know, we have to. But talking to real estate agents is a big part of how we do it, or how I do it, and how I try to explain for other appraisers to do it. Is we're constantly learning. I mean, I learn something new every day about the market. Talking to you guys, just appraising property and being involved in the market. It's all day, every week, all month, all year. So we're at the forefront of any changes. And then I get the rest of the information that I need from you guys. So it's kind of hard not to stay up to date on everything.
How many appraisals are you doing per year, Heinz?
And anywhere between 400 and 500.
Dang,
Wow.
that's wild.
I know you said 500. That is wild.
I've had years over 500.
Wow.
So
That's cranking.
it's
Do you feel like realtors, I feel like our process is similar, but it's also different. I think yours is a little bit more involved, obviously. But do you feel like most realtors that it's obviously a kind of a working relationship are being trained and come up with the right values for properties across the board? Or do you feel like most realtors don't know what the heck they're talking about?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think there's a gap in training. I think that the training that we are given and the level that we put in is vastly different, but the same in a sense. You know, we're trying to solve the value problem. But I think
When
that
you say the training, like they're overvaluing properties
Well,
or or I guess both.
it's based on the training. You can overvalue or
Right.
undervalue something with the lack of training. I don't think that new agents coming in or even some of the old guard that learned a certain way, that way is not relevant anymore. And then there's just a lack of, training. It's not anybody's fault, but there is, if everybody learned something more on more of the same level and went down the same road together, it would promote.
Right, a consensus. And
Yes.
So, how many appraisers do we have? Do you know?
We had an influx when they lowered the education requirements and the hours. And I look at every now and again, if I'm reviewing appraisal, I look at the license number. You can kind of tell, and I think we're in the state of Florida. I think we're in the 6,000 range or something like that. Maybe I'm not quite sure. I don't want to speak to that, but there's more than there was when I started.
Gotcha. Yeah, because when I started in 19, we had 1,800, 1,900 maybe realtors, and now we have over 2,500.
In CPAR, right?
CPAR,
Yeah,
just in
yeah. I'm
CPAR.
talking the state of
You're
Florida.
talking the state of
yeah.
Florida, but I'm just saying that's a pretty big increase. Just
Yeah,
in
I mean, everybody
realtors.
wants. Whenever we have a boom and
Yeah.
people see people making money, they think, I want to do that.
But what's so good about your job is like ours is like if we don't get to the closing table, like
don't get
we
paid.
don't get paid, but you get paid.
Well, yeah, not as much as you, but we get paid.
But you're
like I
doing
said, I have to do 500
we're
appraisals.
We're not doing 500 homes though. Either.
No,
Yeah.
no,
So,
but
yeah, you're
it's a
doing
different.
A lot. It's different, but I think there is a little bit of security in that where, I guess that's another question that I just thought of. What if that house doesn't get to the closing table? You're still getting paid, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're an unbiased party and we don't get paid based
The
on
bank pays
the
you.
results. Correct.
Gotcha. So then the bank, say, has to go after that buyer to.
Well,
or the buyer pays up
will
front.
the buyer they'll pay the fee up front usually,
Right.
and some banks cover the fee. It's part of the close, and
Right.
it'll be in the closing costs somewhere along the way. The buyer will end up paying for it, but to promote the trust and keep all the fraud out and be an unbiased party, the client is the one that pays the appraiser. So that would be the bank or
Gotcha.
an individual. But
Recently, I saw on an appraisal, which I've never seen before, that we're in a declining market. Do you feel like that's true?
in certain areas we are. I mean, it's very case specific. There are areas that are just as stable as they have been. There are areas that are showing an increase a little bit, but yeah, there are areas that are declining, and if you're seeing that now, it's based on the new guidelines that we have to really dive deep into. Do we need to make a declining market adjustment or an appreciating market adjustment, or are we just in a typical ebb and flow real estate market where things are going like this? I mean, you can buy down here, sell up here, and vice versa. It doesn't mean that we're in an appreciating or declining market, because a real estate market does this all year long. But if it's this and this, that obviously is something different. And there we are in like the beach, for instance.
Right.
People purchased homes,
Mm-hmm.
with the intent on making X amount of dollars in short-term rental income.
Right.
That didn't come to fruition. They fell short.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's an inventory spike on the beach, so you have to be competitive. Possibly condo units or
Condos
inventories
staying on the
are
market
crazy.
forever. I feel like everyone's, if they know something about what's going on, they're ready to make a deal. And I think the short-term rentals were so high after COVID because
Right, that's-
everybody was like, we got to go on vacation. Like,
But doesn't that give you fantastic performance to put in front of, the rental companies say, here, give this to your client, they'll make this, and
Right.
they're not going to make that.
And then it's like, okay, this was gross rentals 190,000. Okay, now we're like half that. So that's why you see a lot of people putting it up for sale because it's not meeting those numbers.
Correct.
And their ROI is just not great.
So in a while, however long it takes, when these start moving, the prices then will be set, and we may see that particular product type has declined some. But for the most part, I mean, where I'm at right now, if it's not something specific like that, things are pretty stable. We're in the normal ebb and flow.
Cool. So one last question we're super curious about. What are your thoughts on appraisers who are also licensed realtors? Do you think that creates any conflict of interest, or is it actually helpful to have both perspectives?
It doesn't. It's neither here nor there. You can't appraise your own property that you're selling. Obviously, that you keep out the conflict of interest. But having a real estate license, being a certified appraiser, the perspective should really and truly. This is what I'm promoting. The perspective should be the same. We should all be thinking fairly the same way. We should be. Yes, you're trying to get your client the highest price, and but if we apply certain principles consistently, we should all be the same. So the perspective is really should be the same. But I mean, if I had time to sell, houses,
Right.
I'd throw that in there too. But I
Right.
don't have time to sell houses.
You're too busy doing all these appraisals.
But I know lots of appraisers that have.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues is, he's a broker and he's a certified appraiser and he's an attorney. So he's got it all.
Wow.
Full plate, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, I could see where there'd be a little, like how I think about it is you have an appraiser that's part of a certain brokerage, and then now they're appraising a bunch of homes that their coworkers or colleagues that are part of that brokerage.
That would be a conflict of interest.
So they would basically say, hey, I can't do this appraisal.
They were bound by their guidelines by USPAP to make that determination and say, okay, this is a little too close to home.
Gotcha.
I should not be doing this.
Like we hang out on the weekends, we go to the island every weekend, and I work with him all the time. Maybe I shouldn't be appraising his listings.
That would be time to step back.
But that decision's based on with the appraiser.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
there's
correct.
nobody monitoring that.
No, it's you monitor yourself, and if you
Right.
get caught, there's there are
Repercussions.
serious repercussions. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
That is good. I just had a property close. There was a loan on it, and the solar panels were not paid off. So when it appraised, it had to appraise for the value as if those solar panels weren't on it, correct? Because you can't count the value of those solar panels.
They're just
if
not
they're
there.
not paid off. Okay.
Right. They're just not there.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes the house falls within that range.
Because he's comparing it to other houses with solar panels. He's trying to.
I'm trying, but if there are none, let's just say
Right.
there are none, period,
Right.
right? And you have a range from, we'll just use simple hypothetical numbers, from 300 to 325, right? 300 was your low adjusted comp, 325 was your high. So somewhere, if that contract price falls anywhere in there, the appraiser can say, is my opinion that this contract is supportable at 323 or even at 325. That's where we get to decide, hey, this is making it. And it could be with or without the solar panels, but we're not saying, we're just not giving them any value.
Got it.
That's what I'm not,
Okay.
I can't give them any value and say this solar panel, setup has X amount of contributory value. I can't do that unless they're completely paid off, because the bank will say, please remove that.
And I mean, how many times are they paid off? Very little.
Very little
Very
are they paid off in what I see.
But that means we need to add that extra question when we do a CMA. Are they paid off?
Yeah.
If not, we can't put value on them
Right.
whenever we're listing them.
Yeah, see that's the thing, and I don't want to tell you, because if you tell somebody that, your client, they'll tell you, okay, thanks for your time, and go to the next real
Yeah,
estate agent
that's true.
going to do it. They'll tell you, thanks for your time
Yeah.
for not telling me that this is a
That
fourth
is-
bedroom
have
when
no
it's
value.
not.
Thank
I'll
you
just
for
go
your-
down the road. So you have to say something. But if you tell them, hey, down the line we could run into this because this is the regulation, be prepared. But hey, my house is 5,000 square feet because I put a window unit in my back patio. Well, no, it's not, but you can list it at whatever you want, but as long as they know when it comes back, it may only be 3,500.
Yeah. You
You
prime
know,
them for the consequences
you
of
exactly.
listing
So
it
you don't,
as
because you
yeah.
have to, I mean, I don't envy you guys at all, because you have to tell them what they want to hear and
Yeah.
to get
Or
the
someone
listing, or
behind
somebody
us.
will.
Somebody
Yeah.
will.
Just let the appraiser
Yeah.
be the bad guy, but warn them that
Yeah.
he's coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
So
think
all good to
now
know.
I've been more honest than ever with my clients just because we
I
are in
am
a
too.
buyer's market. So, like, your yard is beautiful, but that doesn't mean your house is worth $200,000 more than your
Right.
neighbors. Like,
Yeah.
love the yard, but you know what I mean? So, I think, that's something that we've been dealing with a lot. But
Yeah.
we really appreciate you joining us.
I had a
That
great
was
time. I had a
fun.
great time.
I
Thanks
hope
for
you can
having
come
me.
back on and
Anytime, you guys.
I'm sure we'll have other questions for the next time around, but that was very informative.
That was very informative.
Thanks,
Thank
Heinz.
you.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's see. Heather, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Are you doing open houses for your listings? How many listings do you have approximately?
Oh, I have 21 listings
21
right now,
listings.
and I have 3 coming to the market. Some of them are vacant land. A lot of them, if they are vacant, I've tried to do open houses. Like during the week, we've got a lot of new agents who they don't necessarily have listings, so they will do open houses on my listings. Doing an open house, it does benefit the seller, but it's also helpful to obtain buyers who are looking in the market. Maybe this house doesn't work for them, but a different house may work, and so that's helpful for some of the newer agents. I find that an open house doesn't always bring a buyer.
Or a qualified buyer.
Correct. A qualified buyer. That's a good point. Because a lot of times, I don't know a better phrase for this, but people are out kicking tires. They're seeing
they
what's
love
on
it.
the market.
There's people, and I have friends. Well, they were clients first, but then you develop relationships, friendships, and this is what they do on the weekends.
Yeah.
Like they want to go look at homes, especially like the newest trends or whatever. It's kind of like when I was a child here. On Mother's Day, we always used to go to Parade of Homes,
Yeah.
right? To look at all the new homes and stuff. And this is a true thing where people, this is what they do. It's a hobby
Yeah.
where they just like to go. They want a cookie or something to drink or whatever, but they have no interest in buying.
Yeah.
But they're just curious, or it could just be a nosy neighbor,
Neighbors are
I want to compare my house to what's on the market.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's
So
right.
that's kind of what I've experienced with open houses is I've done them, but I would say out of, let's just say 50, I've had one qualified buyer that actually, I wouldn't say one qualified buyer, I would say a buyer that actually was interested in that house that actually they had a realtor with that buyer,
Yeah.
and we actually had a deal that we put together,
Yeah.
and it actually got to the closing table.
Right.
So 1 out of 50 is
Yeah.
kind of like where, I think it's, as an agent, maybe if you want to get more buyers or something like that, that's a good thing. But as far as the listing, I haven't been as successful with the open houses. I feel like it's kind of like the old school, like when I'm talking to, someone that's over 60, 70, which isn't that old. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that that's old, but they, in their head, they think, oh, when are you going to do open house? Because they think that's like the best
How
marketing.
you sell it.
But I just feel like now with social media and targeted marketing, and we have 20 things, right? That we're when we go to a listing appointment, we're going to do A, B, C, D, E,
Right.
F, G. And open house for me is on the very bottom. I
Yeah.
feel like if I'm doing these things and we're not getting the traction, we're not getting showings or offers, is more than likely the price.
Absolutely, the price. Now, most qualified buyers are working with an agent. So usually whenever they're working with an agent, they're going to be scheduling a showing with that agent. It's usually your unqualified buyers that you have going out and looking at open houses, or like
Absolutely.
you said, people who just want to snack and pass an open house sign.
And you see this a lot. You see a lot of unqualified buyers and are like, oh my gosh, this is great. But then if they go to try to get a pre-approval with a lender and they find out what that monthly payment is going to be, they're like, never mind.
Yeah.
So I'm not opposed to doing them. It's just kind of like a last resort and request only. It's
Yeah.
not part of my marketing strategy. But
Yeah.
there are some agents that have great ideas. I mean, they're providing Yetis and Louis Vuittons and stuff, drawings. And so there are kind of ways to draw people in. It's just a matter of, I feel like maybe targeted marketing and what I do reaches more qualified buyers.
I agree with that. I do think that if the property, it creates an event when you do an open house to where you can push the marketing out again, a reason to push the marketing out again.
Right.
But the actual outcome of the
That's a
open
good
house
point.
and bringing in a buyer,
Yeah.
I agree with you. It doesn't off.
didn't
I've
think of
only
the-
had one that made an offer on a
Only
house in
one.
17 years
Yeah.
of doing open
So
houses.
this is 6 years, and this was Thomas and I think it was the first year. It was a house off of Missouri Avenue. It was a flip that we did. And I remember just trying to beg people to come, right? Because it's just not like sometimes you'll do an open house and no one will show up.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember I reached out to you, I was like, can you come to my open house?
I remember coming to
You
that open
came,
house.
and you were super busy, and you made time for me on a Saturday or Sunday or
Yeah,
whatever it
always.
was. So I
Always.
appreciate that. I remember stuff like that, Heather.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you bringing when you're showing a bunch of homes or condos? What is your survival kit? I want to know what you're bringing. with
Bubbly
you.
water,
Bubbly water.
snacks, and toilet paper.
Toilet paper.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well,
Beca-
if you're showing a ton of houses,
Yeah.
and you're going to be in your car most of the day and you have to go to the bathroom, hopefully the water's on.
Which is not always the case.
True.
But a lot of times these listings don't have toilet paper in them.
Yeah.
So that's why you're bringing it.
Yeah.
If I don't have toilet paper, because I have one of the two, toilet paper or wet wipes
Yeah.
as a Sawyer. So I always have my wet wipes in the car. And it always happens. If you're showing, I try to limit it to 5 a day, because then after 5, you get tired and all
Yeah.
that. Not only are you tired, but the client's tired, they're getting hungry.
Mhm.
But say you're doing 10, maybe there's a time constraint or
Yeah,
whatever.
They flew in.
It's going to
for-
happen. If
Yeah.
you got to go to the bathroom, more than likely your client's got to go to the bathroom, make sure you have the toilet paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hand sanitizer as well,
Yeah.
because there's not necessarily going to be soap in there. I mean, a lot of like these condos will, because they're on the short-term rental program. But also gas. Make sure there's gas in your vehicle.
Oh my gosh, yes. I've done that before where I planned out all these showings a ton and then I got in the car and the gas
Empty.
light and I'm like, no, I don't even have time to get gas.
Why is there a stereotype with females and not having gas in their vehicle?
I
think
hate
this is
pumping gas.
like my husband gets on to me all
Yeah.
the time, because every time he gets in, it's on empty,
Yeah.
because it's just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
But it is a necessity. You don't want to like be in the middle of showings and you're like, I'll meet you there in 30 minutes because I got to stop at the gas station.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can tell you, when I was pregnant with Sawyer, I ordered the hospital throw up bags from Amazon because I was so sick every day. So what I would do, and I learned this because I had a listing presentation. It was the sweetest elderly couple. They were probably in their late 80s, and they kept their house at like 85 degrees, which when you're dressed like this,
Hot.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
sweating, and when you're pregnant, it's so bad.
Yeah.
And I had drank all my water. And I remember it was long. It was probably a 2-hour listing presentation, because I'm going over the seller's disclosure line by line and just, being really patient.
Yeah.
But I got really sick and I ran into the bathroom and I held it in. But when on the drive home, I just let it all loose and I threw up all over my vehicle because I didn't have time to,
Yeah.
anyways, it was a mess. It was disgusting. But after that happened, I was like, I will not let this happen again.
Yeah.
So I carried the throw up bags, and it happened. I was showing homes, and from like one house to the next, on the way, I'd be throwing, well, I want to say on the way. Maybe I pulled over to
Yeah.
the side or at a stoplight. I would throw up, and then I would, get my hand sanitizer, show the next house. It's just, you just have to do it. You just
Yeah.
have to. And what is so interesting is I feel like I had one of my biggest years when I was pregnant, and I know that you did.
I did too.
I remember this.
It's
You were
wild.
pregnant, and you were just selling things like off. I mean, nothing was gonna stop us.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got sick, but I mean,
I didn't get
throw up bags if you're pregnant.
I didn't
or
get sick too bad with any of my pregnancies, but
That's
I always
nice.
had to pee.
Yeah.
I always
yeah.
had to pee and I remember showing houses in Chipley and Sunny Hills, and there was like one road that was dirt, and I still had like one more house to show, and she was right behind me. The buyer was riding right behind me, and I was like, I'm not gonna make it. I'm gonna pee in this car. So that was But yeah, toilet paper.
Oh my
I have a
gosh.
story where I was showing this sweet couple. They ended up buying from me. But I remember I was standing in the kitchen with the wife of the buyer, and I see the husband disappeared somewhere, but me and the wife were talking so much and going over like the process in the
Mhm.
house and everything. I didn't really notice what was he was doing. There was no water on at the house. And
The worst,
I
Heather.
see him outside just running past the window. And I'm like, that's weird. And I saw it in the corner of my eye, but I was like, maybe he's just checking out the yard. And I see him run back with a bucket. He had used the bathroom in one of the bathrooms, went to the neighbor's house, knocked on the door, got a
Got the
bucket,
water.
used their water, went back to flush the toilet. So,
That's another, you could, I always say have water with you.
yeah.
Not necessarily, I mean, but now that I'm thinking, you could also use it for that. The water's not on and you go to the
Yeah.
bathroom, use that
Flush
bottle of
it.
water. Make sure you have other bottles of water because your client might get thirsty, but you could also use it for that. That happened to me at Marina Bay. Um, so embarrassing because I always get the first one you can get there early, like the first showing of the day.
Yeah.
You can get there early, turn on the lights, go to the bathroom if you need to.
Yeah.
Went to the bathroom, didn't think anything of it, tried to flush, no water. The water wasn't on. And then here comes my client in, and I'm like, oh no, I had my hand sanitizer, thank goodness. But I had to deal with that problem after I showed that property, which
Oh,
was not
no.
fun.
No.
But we have stories for days for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so every episode we like to answer a real estate question that isn't commonly known. VA and FHA loans have their own rules about handling low appraisals. You have the Tidewater Initiative for VA loans and the FHA amendatory clause requirements for FHA loans. We will talk about this with our guests today, but I kind of want to dive into it. For VA loans, Heather, what is the Tidewater Initiative?
So the Tidewater Initiative, in layman's terms, it essentially gives the agent and the buyer the ability, if the appraiser notifies the lender that the appraised value is going to come in low, it gives the agent and the buyer the ability to submit additional comps to hopefully justify the price. Because at the end of the day, the goal is for the buyer to be able to purchase the property that they want and be a homeowner. And so this gives them the ability to justify the value. Now, once those comps are submitted, the agent, or before they're submitted, the agent has 48 hours to submit those comps, and then they're presented to the appraiser. And then the appraiser can adjust the value as they see fit. And it also goes to an appraisal review department with the lender, and they review that appraisal as well. And hopefully, once that Tidewater initiative is implemented, hopefully the buyer and the buyer's agent, or sometimes the listing agent, is able to submit comps to bring the value up. Tidewater just essentially means that the value or the appraised value is coming in less than the contract price.
And they never say what that value is.
No,
So
they won't tell
never
you.
speculate on that. I know when I get the text or a call, hey, we have a Tidewater, that just means it's coming in lower than what we're under contract for, correct?
Right.
How does that differ from an FHA amendatory clause and the whole FHA process of reconsideration of value?
So an FHA amendatory clause allows, if the appraisal comes in low, so the appraisal is already submitted. If the appraisal comes in low, under the contract value, then the FHA buyer has the ability, a couple of options. They have the ability to back out of the contract and receive their earnest money deposit. They can also renegotiate the contract price with the seller, or they can come up with the difference from the appraised value to the contract price.
So it's protection for the buyer.
Yes.
And this is, I call it FHA rider, but it's attached to the contract.
Yep.
It's similar to like an appraisal contingency that you'll see with like a conventional loan.
Right.
But it's for like FHA or VA. You'll see this rider.
Yeah.
And, essentially, it has to appraise at the contract price, or the buyer can say, hey, seller, Mr. Seller, you need to lower this price or I'm walking, and they can do that. Especially in this market, I feel like
Absolutely.
you are seeing sellers say, okay, we'll lower that price to make the deal work. Whereas after COVID 21, 22, you had a lot of buyers that had the liquidity and money they were paying over this just
Yeah.
to make the deal work because the seller had 5 other offers in line.
Yep.
So that seller knew if the buyer wasn't going to negotiate a little bit, that they'll just go to buyer number 2.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely. And that appraisal, it doesn't transfer to the next buyer usually. I think
Usually.
there's some other regulations with certain loan types that it might, but usually it doesn't transfer. And so it's just a brand new appraisal, and it may appraise with that backup offer for what the contract price
Right.
is.
We always like to end our episode with a little motivational quote to get you through the week.
Price is what you pay, value is what you get. A quote by Warren Buffett.
So the price is what a buyer is willing to pay for a home, but the value is what an appraiser determines the home is actually worth based on the data. And that value is what the lenders care about.
It's such a great reminder that emotion can drive price, but the numbers drive value, and appraisals are there to keep those two in check.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, subscribe to our podcast. What real estate questions do you want us to answer and cover in future episodes? We'd love to hear from you as your feedback helps us shape the show. Drop a comment and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.